Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, there's a couple.
On behalf of the Waukee Area Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Directors, and all of our members, we'd like to thank you for joining us this morning at the 2023 Waukee Legislative Coffee. Don't need to applaud there, that's okay. The Chamber and our Government Affairs Committee is excited to once again host this legislative coffee event for the Waukee community. I'd like to thank the City of Waukee for hosting today, Echo's Cookies for providing the cinnamon rolls, and if you haven't had one, you don't want them. It's fine, just more for other people to take home. No, they're amazing, so make sure you get that. And for Coffee Smith for providing the coffee this morning. My name is Rob Grove, and I serve as the 2023 Board Chair for the Waukee Area Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is the guide, connector, and cheerleader for the Waukee area business community. We help local businesses of all size become connected so that they can thrive with the Waukee community on their side. The Chamber presents this coffee because we realize the importance of giving our community members the opportunity to ask questions and have an open dialogue with our legislators. This morning's forum will feature State Senator Sarah Trone Garriott and State Representative Kenan Judge. We ask that you observe rules of decorum and please do not interrupt anyone asking their question or any of the legislators in their response. Please be courteous, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. We will begin with questions that were pre-submitted and then take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please make your way to the podium for your turn to ask. We've scheduled this event for 90 minutes, so please limit yourself to one question and we'll get through as many as we can. To get started, I'd like to give our legislators the opportunity to introduce themselves and give a brief update on this year's session. We'll start with Senator Trone Garriott.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see you here, and thank you to the Waukee Chamber for hosting these events. I've said this before, but Kenan and I are really happy to show up for any event, any activity that's going on. During the legislative session, we don't really have the wherewithal to plan these things ourselves, but we're glad to show up if someone else wants to pull it together. And so we really appreciate this opportunity. The legislative session, we've seen a lot of bills coming through that I'm not sure if they're really in step with what the people of Iowa are needing or wanting right now at this time. A lot of hot button issues that I feel are being used as an occasion to really step into matters of local control and local decision making. And so I am really concerned about that. One of the bills that is getting some attention, but not as much as others, is there's a great big sweeping reorganization of our state government. And this bill was created by an out-of-state consultant group. It cost about $1 million. The governor's office paid for this group to come in and say, this is what Iowa state government should look like. But I'm not clear about how that process actually proceeded and if there was really a time for listening to people in Iowa, department heads, folks who work in those departments to understand what's really needed. And certainly there's opportunities to make changes, but it seems like the people of Iowa really kind of left out of that process. And in the Senate, that bill has already passed out of our chamber. And so in 6 weeks, with just about 5 subcommittee hearings where folks could speak for maybe there were like 20 minutes devoted to the Department of the Blind. And there were a lot of people who showed up who wanted to talk about that with a lot of concerns. And then they had to just keep moving on to, so many really important services, so many important considerations to be made as part of this process. And I'm not sure if we really did our homework. And there were a lot of concerns raised. And then that bill passed out of the Senate without any amendments. And certainly, a consultant can give us a place to start, but we really, really need to do our work with the people of our state to make sure that this is truly going to fit what Iowa needs and not necessarily be more efficient for what the governor wants. Because a lot of it is shifting power to that executive position. Most of the positions now serve at the pleasure of the governor. Some of the important consumer advocacy programs or programs that are really, providing checks and balances, accountability, feedback to our state government are now under the entities that they were supposed to be investigating. And so I'm really concerned about that because we do need to have some independence and some separation of powers to make sure that we're doing a good job for the people of Iowa. We need to have some of those built-in safety measures and checks and accountability and transparency. And so for me, that process has moved way too fast, and it will be a really significant change for our state. So that bill is now in the House, and there's an opportunity for folks to give feedback because it touches every aspect of state government. And there's still an opportunity to make changes to address concerns about that legislation. I'm a little bit disappointed that we're not doing more about childcare in almost every discussion I've had with businesses, with community leaders. Childcare is a great need in our state that we truly do not have enough affordable, accessible, quality childcare. And this week, the Department of Human Services has enacted emergency rules to raise the threshold for folks who want to get child care assistance and increase the payments for child care providers for the child care assistance program, because where the legislature has it set is way too low to be effective, to really help. It truly is an emergency. And so the department is enacting these emergency rules using mostly a lot of federal money to make up the difference and pay for it. But we really need in the budgeting process to be saying, this is something we have to act on. Mental health is an ongoing concern in our state. We've reorganized how our mental health system works, but we really, truly need to invest in it and make sure that there are more resources for all people, but especially our youth. And in my district, we had a child die by suicide recently, and we can just see I've talked to those parents, and they were trying to get help, and the resources weren't offered to them, and they truly were not available. There's too many folks waiting too long to get help when their loved ones need it, and we can do a lot better. So I want to see more action on those pieces as well. That's a really big priority for me. I don't know how much time I have, Rob.
You're probably doing pretty good so far.
Am I done, or?
I think you can do one more little thing. Yeah.
One more little thing. And just for me, as a legislator, I'm relatively new at this. I was elected in 2020, reelected in 22, and there's a lot of folks in our community that don't know who their state legislators are. They don't know what's happening down at the Capitol. If they're interested, they're not really sure how to engage. And so for me, educating the public about how to be part of the process is really important, because I learned so much from the people in my community and across the state. And so I just really encourage folks to, make sure you know who your legislators are. I mean, if you live in Waukee, it's us. But we aren't the only ones that you can reach out to. There's important decision makers all along the process, and you can reach out to other legislators, even if they're not representing your district, because they're making decisions for the whole state. So chairs of committees, folks who are in the leadership of parties, those are important folks also to share your concerns with. And when people reach out to me about an issue, I try to also give them a next step and be like, these are also people that should be hearing from you as well, just to give folks a next step, because there's so much we can learn from the folks in our community. And I think the number one job of a legislator is to be out listening. Thank you.
Perfect. Very good. Representative Judge?
Yes, my name's Kenan, Judge, for those of you that don't know me. I'm relatively new in the legislature as well. My wife, Kathy, and I raised our 4 kids here in Waukee, worked here, had a career, 38-year career with Hy-Vee. Once I retired, you always look, hey, what's the next step for, what are you going to do? And this, I never thought it'd be in politics. So I don't really look at myself as a politician, and I think it's a bad connotation sometimes. So I look at myself as a leader, and that's what I try to take to the State House. So the things that are important to me are workforce, economic growth. I spend a lot of time in those areas. I think we need to spend more time there because we have to grow our economy and able to afford the bills that we have in front of us. Education's very important. Housing is a real big passion of mine, and one hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit today. So I started serving in 2018. So that I'm on my third term. I'm up for election every 2 years in the House side. So starting my 5th year, my third term, and I feel like I found a good place to serve. So we need more people that get engaged, that are willing to go in there and do the work, that are, in my view, more on these core issues that we're facing. We don't talk enough about this. And I'd like to get back on track and get talking about that more. So a little bit about me.
Very good, thank you. So we'll start off with questions that were submitted. So the first question, we'll start with Senator Sarah Trone Garriott. And the question is, what are your top priorities for small businesses during the session?
So I think that there are a lot of systemic issues that we have an opportunity to be working on right now. Childcare was one of the issues that I brought up earlier. When we talk to a lot of folks who have left the workforce or are not able to engage as fully as they'd like to in the workforce, childcare is the #1 piece. We saw a lot of women leave the workforce during the pandemic because of that whole system just collapsing with education and childcare. A lot of women stayed home to care for their kids, and they're not back at full strength. And so that's a huge challenge for families, thinking about how we can provide that truly affordable quality childcare. And in a lot of businesses, sometimes it's about the economy of scale, but you can't do that with kids. Kids cannot be warehoused to make their care cheaper. We really need to make sure that as a state, we're investing because it's not really a business model that you can scale up to make it cheaper, because then the quality, the safety suffers. And I think that the investment that we can make in early childhood learning, it pays off. Every dollar we invest in like pre-K programs, quality pre-K programs generates about $6 of economic benefit and lifelong benefits for those learners. So, when you look at kids who've had pre-K education, they tend to do better. The impact, they're above their peers year after year after year. It's not just initially, and it's hard to make up that difference if you haven't had that quality pre-K education. And so I'm hopeful that something will be happening in the budget process, but we haven't seen any legislation moving forward about pre-K, providing more support for our public schools to offer pre-K, or for really supporting childcare options financially. A lot of folks struggle to find affordable housing in the communities they work in. And so if people can't live in the community, it makes it really hard to take a job there. And I know the city of Waukee is working on that effort, but we can do so much better as a state to be thinking about that workforce housing, affordable for different levels of income, because it's pretty expensive to live out here. And there's a lot of people coming to the area, a lot of new building, but are we really providing the housing for the workforce population that we need to be attracting? And then transportation, if someone cannot live in the community, then they need to be able to get to work. And, transportation is pretty expensive. And some folks at different financial levels really struggle to have access to that. Our public transportation system isn't amazing in this city. And we are seeing less and less investment in some of those public efforts. And so getting creative about how people can get to work, home, school, be in the places where we want them to be. And then overall, thinking about, is this the community that folks want to live in? Is it attracting people to our area? And we have tremendous growth and opportunity here in this community. Not every community in Iowa is like that. So when I'm at the legislature, I have to speak about my community because it's different than a lot of my other colleagues who are in shrinking small town, rural communities where their counties are just kind of emptying out and they're all coming here. But we need to be thinking about, there's a diversity of kind of communities that we need to be supporting here. And so it's different opportunities and challenges here in our growing community. But for me, those are three things that I think would really help: childcare, affordable housing, transportation.
Small business is the lifeblood of Iowa, and it's contributes to economic growth more than we think. And it's important that we support and talk and listen to small business. So, as Senator Trone Garriott said, Waukee and Clive is different, than the rest of the state. And that's one of the things that you learn being in the legislature, that it does take the whole state to become better. And we have to look at all aspects. And the thing I look at is, and it's something that I said in my opening remark, is economic growth is very, very vitally important to this state. And we need to start thinking about, we have not talked this year about how we're going to grow the economy. That has not come up this year. What are we going to do for rural Iowa to grow this state and make it vibrant? We passed a tax cut that I voted for, $2.6 billion out of an $8.5 billion budget. And we'll talk about education going forward. But how do you pay for services, which public education, Medicaid is 74% of your budget? We drop our tax rate, which I voted for. However, we have to have a 3.5% growth rate in the state, or 4%, to make up for it. We have a big surplus. We can draw down on that. But we need to get back to talking about economic growth and how it impacts a community, even like Waukee. And if you talk about Waukee and you talk to business, the first thing they talk about is we need workers, Kenan. We need workers. What are you doing about the workforce? And sometimes these problems are big and complex and you can't change them overnight. Senator Garriott brought up some great comments on, and I won't repeat them, on childcare and education and pre-K, how vital that is. And she's right on that. But we also have, and she mentioned workforce, but I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges. We can't find the help. And so we have to be more welcoming to people that don't live here, to get them here. Our state's not growing. There was 1,500 new students in the state of Iowa last year. That's not very many new kids, numbers. Okay, they're all new. They graduate, move up, but there's 1,500 new kids. So guess how many of those are in Waukee? Yeah, 750. So now you're talking about, I'm going to go back to this 3.5% growth rate. We can't handle it all in Waukee. We can't. We can't charge this whole economy. We share in the economy.
We got to carry it all.
Yeah. Yes. But we have to look at the whole state, and that's why they call us state legislatures. We serve our district, we talk about our district, and we defend our district. But we also have to look at the entire state. And I think our biggest challenge, I shouldn't say the biggest, because Sarah brought some great challenges, and they're all important. Childcare is, you can put it at the top. I'm not ranking these, but I think housing is critical that we figure this out. And it's imperative, if we're going to grow this state's workforce, we have to have workforce housing. And it's not here, folks. It's not here. We're not working on it. We need to put more money into it. And you say, well, you're in government, you just want to spend more money. what would be wrong with spending money and saying, we're going to have some grants if you want to fix your house up? So in these, I'm going to say rural Iowa, and make it a workforce housing that will pay a little bit. We'll help you fix your front porch up, or we'll build senior housing. We'll help to get started so people can move out of their houses that are seniors, and then it opens up another house. I'll use my old company, for example, and I don't represent them anymore, but I know Hy-Vee and Sheridan, Iowa. They draw workforce there from 20 counties. There is no housing to support that business. So that's why you're seeing businesses leave. So I think that's and I'm not going to touch on what, I'm not just going to repeat because I agreed with everything that Senator Garriott said, but we have one of the oldest aging housing stocks in the country in Iowa. And we're going to have to address that if we're going to be vibrant and growing. And then we need more people. Whatever happened, we demonize. Whatever happened to saying, we'll take you, everybody come. Whatever happened to that? It's very frustrating that we got to get back to that. We need people in this state. We need to grow this state. And that's what we should be focused on. And I think that helps all small business. It all links together.
Absolutely, thank you. Our next question, and Representative Judge, will have you kick this one off. Where do you stand on school choice legislation?
Well, that's a great question. And now we have a voting record. Okay. And I vehemently opposed what we did. I think public schools are the great equalizer and is a vibrant part of every community and gives every kid a chance to be successful and to have an education. And I'm a part of that. I grew up in a poor community, the third poorest county in the state of Iowa. But guess what I had? I had quality public education. And I was able to learn. And that was all the formal education I had. We couldn't afford to go to college. There was not even talk of it. When we had a bad family, we had a great family, wonderful family. But that wasn't an issue. That wasn't something we talked about. And I'm not bitter about that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I was lucky that I had those teachers in that education. So to me, that is our most important job in that legislature, is to make sure everybody has the same education. So we pass a bill and introduce that you can have your parental choice. You take your money, you go where you're at. Sounds great on the outside, really does. It's a great talking point. In my opinion, it was not the right way to go. And now I need to tell you why and why I voted against it. If you are not, we're inflationary times, everybody feeling inflation. Think about what our school districts. Sarah and I have one of the most best school districts in the state. But sometimes you got to look out away from here and see what you got going and look at the whole state. And we don't have the money to do what we just did. In 3 years, now remember what I said about that budget. We're an $8.6 billion budget. We're going to drop it by $2 billion by 2026. We're going to spend $1 billion in the next 3 years on that. The math isn't there after 26, folks. You can do the math however you want it. But you can say whatever, but in 26, it isn't going to work. So we're going to pay in 3 years. Anybody that wants to go to private school goes to private school. I don't have any problem with private schools. I think they're great. They do a great job. We don't have the money to fund 2 school systems. And it sounds good, but how are you going to make it work after 26? It's going to work to 26. Reason 1. Reason 2, you go into rural Iowa. And I know rural Iowa. I'm from there, Albia. You take and open up a private charter school, could be a fringe group, left, right, I don't care what you say. opens up and takes 30, 40 kids, opens a storefront, the public, all kinds of empty storefronts down there, opens up a school, $7,500 a kid. And all of a sudden, that school district's in serious trouble to where you're closing. So then that affects the economy in that area. Last thing anybody wants to do is lose their schools. It's happening down in Warren County right now. So we're going to see more consolidation in rural Iowa. Waukee is not, I mean, we're growing. We have 750 kids. So anybody that's decreasing is mathematically their budget doesn't work out. I mean, you just have to talk to the folks and they can show you. We're fortunate here, and we serve in one of the best school districts in the state and very well ran. But it's going to be, that's why I'm for every kid has to have the same education, access. And you say, well, Kenan, they're going to get school. But what about, what's the first things that go? Arts, music, things that make these kids well-rounded. Larger class sizes. These are all, you're not going to see it overnight. It's a slow drip. It's a slow drip. And public education, in my view, is the most critical thing we work on there.
So I think it's misleading to call this legislation school choice legislation, because in order for parents truly to have a choice in the state of Iowa, our public school system needs to be really robust, really strong. You know, if we don't invest in that system, then parents are really left with no choice, that they have to try to look somewhere else to meet their educational needs. So, you know, for me, there's a lot of concern about what it's going to do to our public schools. And we heard that from folks. We heard that loud and clear from Iowans. There was a lot of concern about this bill. The emails that I got were probably 5-1 against. And I know that there were folks reaching out to my Republican legislators. There has been a lot of frustration in some of those rural counties and rural districts and small towns over voting for this legislation. And I know they're hearing about that. The thing about the way this legislation was set up is the only ones who really get to choose are the private schools. So they get to decide who they admit. And some kids are more expensive to educate, and so they're not going to really have a choice. Students with IEPs, those individual education plans, anyone with a disability, anyone with behavioral issues, anyone who isn't a high achieving student, we're not going to see them being able to take advantage of this program. And that was a big concern for a lot of parents, saying, you know, the schools, the public schools, are going to have to continue to provide services to all of these other kids, and it'll just be skimming off the highest achieving and easiest to educate kids to go to private schools. And then the reality is that these schools are only located in certain counties. There's a lot of parts of the state that don't have private schools, or the private schools that exist actually don't have the capacity to start admitting additional students. And the way the bill was drafted is it's going to be benefiting kids who are currently attending private schools. And it's graduated for the first couple of years. There are some pretty minimal income limits, 300% federal poverty, 400%, which is actually really quite high when we say people can get food assistance only at 160% of federal poverty and below, but then we set the first threshold at 300% for taking public money to private schools. I mean, that's hitting a very different population. Those aren't the low income, struggling families. Those are people who can afford to make this choice with their own kind of financial resources. And my concern was that adding the $1 billion over several years to our budget, we were going to have to squeeze other parts of the budget to make that work, because overall there's been a real resistance to increasing the state budget as years go by and costs rise. And so that money is going to come from somewhere, and it's going to come out of the public school budget. And so we're already seeing that this year. We saw 3% state supplemental aid increase. Costs rose by a significantly higher percentage. So that is falling behind the true cost of education and running a school. And that means that even though it's an overall increase, and when you look at the whole number, it seems like a lot, but per student, that's $140 per student increase. I know I have 2 kids. I spent a lot more than $140 per kid to feed them and clothe them and house them and pay for transportation and all of those things. And schools are facing those rising costs as well. And so what we're seeing with this proposed budget for the coming year is 72 mostly rural and small town school districts are going to have less money next year than they did this year. They have declining enrollment. And so even if they lose 5 kids, they have 5 less kids to educate next year, they're going to have to cut a teaching position. They're going to have to cut programs. They're going to have to start thinking about consolidating. Just a small change in school population at this funding level means that they're going to have to make some big cuts. Or these 72 school districts have the option of raising property taxes, just trying to maintain what they had last year. That's not great for the local community to have to come up with more money to try to do the same and actually a little less than they were doing the year before. And that's real hard on our public schools in those small towns and rural communities. Those are the hearts of their community. If the school goes, nobody's going to want to live there. Nobody's going to want to work there. If your kids have to be on the bus for 2 hours every day, forget it. They're going to move to Waukee. And so if we want people to be able to stay in those small towns and rural communities, we really, really have to invest in their public schools so they can offer really quality education no matter where you are in the state. And so we've already seen legislation in this session. We debated it on Tuesday in the Senate, a bill to lower the standards of what is expected of our public schools because they can't meet those standards. So schools are having a really hard time recruiting and retaining staff to be able to provide arts education, librarians, languages. And so we passed some legislation saying it's okay. You don't have to. You can offer less because it's really hard for you to be able to recruit and retain the people who could lead these programs for your schools, which is going to put our Iowa students at a disadvantage going into college. But it's not really solving the problem. It's not giving the schools the resources they need to be able to offer those robust programs. And I heard, well, they don't have to lower their standards. We're just saying that in those situations where they can't make it work, they can. A lot of times these things become the ceiling and not the floor. And we'll see schools, because of the economic realities, having to say, we can't offer as many years of language or arts. We can't have educated and trained librarians, which seems to be really important right now to make sure they're making good choices for the materials we have in our buildings. So that it all seems to be moving in the wrong direction. So I very much spoke against and voted against this legislation. We have a number of very generous scholarships, tax cuts, all kinds of opportunities for families who choose to send their kids to private school, ways to help lower income families to send their kids to private school if they choose. Those all remain in addition to this program too. And that's just a lot of money being directed to a new state-sponsored educational system while we still have this other one. And I'm afraid that overall the quality for our students is really going to suffer.
Thank you. We've got one more question before we're going to open it up to everyone. So get ready, get your position close to the podium. Senator Garriott, we will have this question addressed to you. Do you have any comments on disaster preparedness, response, and recovery for the state?
Yeah, so I know that there are some pieces of legislation that have been proposed about providing kind of a tax weekend for families to go out and buy those disaster preparation, the resources that you need to have on hand, that everyone should have on hand, which would be a really great way to draw attention to preparedness, educate the public about it, and get people to have those things on hand in case of an emergency. I'm supportive of that. I'm not sure what that potential is for this legislative session, but nothing is truly dead. We've passed the first funnel. Even if something did not move forward at any point, the majority party can bring it back or work it into another bill or put it in the budget. So I think there's a possibility there. There is some legislation to talk about decision making in terms of how we fund our emergency response. And I believe that is moving forward to just make sure that the right folks are part of making those decisions. I know in some counties, there's been some tension between the supervisors and the folks who are most directly involved in emergency management planning. And so this bill is trying to address, I don't think it's not happening here in Dallas County, but there are some places that it has, and trying to make a better process that's clear about who gets to decide when and how money is spent for those purposes. And I think that's important. I really appreciate those professionals that do the work of emergency response, because there's so many things that are happening in our community all the time that they are responding to and showing up for. And whether it's natural disasters or accidents on our freeway, it's really important to make sure that they have the resources they need, because we know how bad things can be if we don't have the properly trained people and resources to respond to those issues.
Yes, I'm aware of some legislation out there that addresses the emergency management county level, and how they prepare. They get home if we have a disaster. So what are you doing for disaster is, they have Homeland Security, emergency management. There's the Red Cross. They put together at Fort Dodge and have a coordinating, they coordinate there. So there is the National Guard, Red Cross. So we have a system that works. Derecho would have been a good example. But there is a bill, and I think where this is bubbling from is a bill that the local emergency management in each of these counties it's a funding issue. Who decides how much funding they get, and does it come out of, do they decide, or does the supervisors decide? And I think obviously we have to support them, and they need the resources. This bill's not before us yet, so I haven't done a lot. I mean, there's hundreds of bills out there, so you kind of process this to when it gets started and in the system, then you start learning about it. So you're not working on, you don't have the capacity to work on 200 bills at one time, but you're working on the ones that are moving. So I think this is important. And then the first way that I address it is, obviously we have to have emergency management coordination. I mean, that's very important. But I'll look at this legislation and say, what's the problem we're trying to address? I mean, where is the problem? And is it a problem? So, I think we have to look at that. We have to have conversations, and there's a lot of time we need input from the public. I get my best input when people call me that are, we had this saying at Hy-Vee, if you want to know if the bread slicer's broke, you go talking to the person slicing the bread. You don't try to dream this stuff up yourself. So over the last 5 years, I've got a lot of contacts that I can call if it's about emergency management. I can talk to our person in Dallas County, who I have talked to. Obviously, Mark, the supervisor, he would probably know more about this bill right now than and maybe what's going on. So they can call you and say, hey, here's the Paul Harvey version, the rest of the story. And we see that a lot. I think it's important. that we have these discussions. And the only thing I ask in these discussions is that we're having open, honest dialogue that's civil, and we're trying to solve problems. And we can get a lot of good things done. This doesn't have to be. And most of the bills we work on, that's what we're doing down there. Everybody thinks it's just highly partisan. It is some days more so than others. But really, a lot of legislation we're talking about, we're really trying to figure it out. And I can give you some examples of that later if their time allows. But and making Iowa a better place. So I think the news media sometimes has a role to play in making sure that we're talking about some of these good things that we're doing as well.
Very good. Thank you. So at this time, we'll open it up to the room. So if anyone has a question, please make your way to the podium and go right ahead and ask.
Well, I have a question that I suspect that neither of you are the prime people to answer it, but I would like to know why, if I'm funding, my tax dollars are going to fund private schools, why are they not called public schools? I can't vote for their school board. I can't impact their curriculum because they're not subject to the same edicts that are coming down from the legislature, apparently, about what books and how things are called, sex ed or promoting promiscuity or whatever else their agenda is. And I personally don't like my tax dollars going to fund things that I have no say about. I can at least vote you out or in.
Whoa.
But I have no say about what's coming down from the legislature, since my representatives are apparently not supporting this.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece of the discussion about these, educational savings account legislation, is the way that it's structured. The money goes to the families. There is a third-party out-of-state contractor that will administer the program under the Department of Education. And then there'll be tens of thousands of individual savings accounts that the money will go into that the families will spend. There's a lot of levels there that beg for oversight and accountability to understand how that money is being spent, because it doesn't only need to be spent on tuition. It could be spent on a whole host of other educational services through other private companies as well. And the taxpayers deserve to know that they're getting their money's worth. And so I did file some legislation to require the Department of Education to collect demographic information about the families who are receiving those and how that money is being spent. So, that's a piece of the accountability for taxpayers. But then also, because it's going to the families, the argument has been made that we can't expect the private institutions that receive the money to follow any of the state standards, that we are not allowed to place any standards on these private institutions. An important part of private schools is that they're independent, that they can, have independence in choosing how they want to craft their education. At Dowling, they talk about a Christ-centered education, really important to that institution. But it should the taxpayers then be funding that? I think that's a really important question. And I'm really concerned that Iowa taxpayers will not have much say in how that money is being used. We put a lot of requirements on our public schools. There's a lot of levels of accountability. We can, elect our school boards. Those school boards then determine who is leading the schools. They can hire and fire those administrators. It's accountable at many levels. But the money seems to go into kind of a black hole with these ESAs. And I don't really think that that's appropriate or fair.
Yeah, I'll just dovetail a little bit on what Senator Garriott said. I'm a capitalist. I've always been. I believe in capitalism. I think it's the best way to organize a government, and I understand that. I worked in a big corporation and get it. However, there are certain things we have to share in order to have a vibrant society. And education is one of them. If we want to fund private schools, that's one thing. But you got to pay for it, folks. And I can tell you that if I start lining up people to say, hey, how are we going to pay for this in 26? We don't know what it's going to cost. A nonpartisan revenue source says it's going to cost $1 billion in 3 years. We have that money. That money is, we're approaching over a $2.5 billion surplus in the state of Iowa. So, and a lot of that is due to, the whole stimulus and all I can go clear into why I think it is, but I think we got to be careful that we're looking further out, and you bring all voices to the table. School choice on the outside really sounds good. It really does. My parent, my choice, that's what I'm going to do. My kid's going here. But there's some things I go back to that we have to share in society in order to have a society that's educated and well-informed and is a workforce. So I'm very passionate about this. And we talked about education in our opening remarks. I don't want to just keep going and honing on this. But I believe I believe we're going to try to fund 2 school systems and a public school. Now, I look at this stuff on a business level, and if I have a declining enrollment, my fixed costs are the same. They're the same. They don't go, I can't cut. I can close buildings. I can get rid of teachers. I can raise how many kids are in a class. But is that really what we want to do? So, in my opinion, I don't think it's the right way to go. So we'll see, how things transpire here, how we go. I think we're going to be fine in the next few years. This is a slow drip. This isn't one thing like next year, boom, everything's broken. No, it's not. This is a slow drip that we're going to have to keep a good eye on. And I think the thing as a public that you should watch or could watch is if you see our economy struggling, if we're not growing, I will tell you there is no way the math works if we don't grow. And I'm looking at Brad Dietz back there, city administrator. He could speak to this in nauseam, what it costs to run a city, to what it costs. There's no difference in running a school. So we must increase this economy at a roaring rate. If you see us saying, well, Iowa's economy staying, and that could happen at any time. I'm not a doomsdayer, but if we would go into any type of recession, it would be serious consequences that we'd have to face at the state legislature.
Good morning. I'm Larry Loss. I live in Clive. Thank you for being here. Rob, thank you for hosting. One of the things that helps communities grow is having good, safe, recreational opportunities. Bike trails are a big part of Waukee community. Obviously, we have the trailhead here. There are 3 bills currently that made it through the funnel, thankfully, that deal with bicycle safety issues. None of these bills are going to require any kind of funding. So you have House File 586. It's in transportation. Garriott is the floor manager of that. That is asking to treat bicyclists the same as pedestrians in the crosswalks. I think that's a pretty common sense item to have, and hopefully that will continue to move forward. House File 422 is in public safety. Vondran is the floor manager of that. That increases the penalties for motorists who cause serious injury or death of cyclists. And I think both of you know, I was one of those people that was involved in a very serious incident with a distracted driver this last year. In the Senate, Senate File 547 is in Ways and Means. Klimish is the floor manager. That just passed committee this week, and that deals with the hands-free operation of a mobile device while you're driving a vehicle. Again, right to the heart of my situation where a distracted driver was looking at their phone when they caused the incident that I was involved in. So I would strongly urge support for these three bills as they continue to make their way through the process. The other piece I wanted to mention this morning, as I sit on the governing board of the Heart of Iowa Mental Health Region that covers Dallas County, we started a new program. It started with the police department in Waukee, where we are pairing a crisis intervention officer with a mental health professional. So if there's calls related to mental health that come in, we're sending adequately trained people to respond to those calls. Waukee was first, started last fall. Clive started in January. Urbandale started in February. West Des Moines will start in this program in April. In addition to providing a new officer to these police departments to work on this front, we're also providing 40 hours of mental health training for every police officer in all of these departments. So far, 260 officers have been trained, with the goal of having all 400 trained by the end of October. We're able to do this because of the funding change that you talked about earlier. And with a growing community like Waukee and Dallas County, there were additional funds to try and bring a program like that forward. I believe the funding for this is good through this next fiscal year. And then we're going to be right to the heart of what you've talked about this morning. How do we continue to fund these kind of programs to help our citizens and help continue programs that are having positive impacts on our community? So I just wanted to mention both of those and appreciate any comments you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I'll just tick down through these bills. I'm in support of House File 586. Hopefully we can get it to the floor. Bicyclists treating the same as pedestrians. House File 422. I am not as familiar with that bill. I have not seen it yet. You said it's out of committee in public safety, right? Yeah, and I have not seen it. So I shouldn't really just say, hey, I'm gonna, I need to, look at it and read it. Hopefully it makes it to the floor where we can have a discussion. The hands-free, I hope we can get that passed this year. I voted on it. This will be the third time now to pass it. And so I'm hoping that this is the year we can get it done and get it. That's refreshing that it's on the Senate side first, because that's where I think it's had some problems before. And so I'm hoping we can get this to the floor. Mental health, the police departments, I think it's a very important topic. Mental health is one of the touches all of us. And I think that's a good positive step forward. I knock a lot of doors. I talked to a lot of police officers that were very, very happy that they had this and was really excited about it. And so I think it's good for that we are able to do this. And I think you're making a huge difference in sitting on that board. And we need to continue this program and expand on it. Doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where, these police officers, they have other things they have to be doing. And besides, I give you a good example. I was at a restaurant downtown, and clearly somebody was mentally ill on the corner and causing ruckus. And police officer came. I went out, and I just, as a citizen, try to find out, hey, could I help this? And you should see how good that police officer treated that person and how we don't always see that side. So some of this is that training is good as well. And then after that, we have to have some place to take them for help. we can't take them to the jail down the street here. And a lot of times that's what we're doing. And they need help. And in mental illness, sometimes it's tied to substance abuse where they're self-medicating. And we have to have programs that we can treat people. I think we, in the very bones of our society, we have to look out for people that need help. And we need to spend more time on it. And it's easy to say, we need more resources, we need more time, but we need more discussion. And we need to bring it out of the dark ages that it's a stigma that's behind it. And that's about education and talking about it. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's important work. So I appreciate you serving on that board.
So I know that the recreation opportunities in this area are just a huge benefit to our community. They really draw folks here. And I tell people all the time, when I was living in Virginia and we knew we were moving to Iowa, I was number one excited about our great public schools, but number two were the bike trails. And I bought our whole family. We got bikes. We were ready, to come and enjoy that bike trail network. And so having, laws that acknowledge the number of bicyclists in our communities and make that safer for folks is really important because not all trails are connected. Some folks commute by bike. We want to make sure that we have really good laws that keep pace with the different kinds of transportation folks are using to get places. So generally, I'm supportive of those ideas. Got to look and see what those bills look like when they get to us, because sometimes things get amended and then it's not quite the same anymore. But I really appreciate the way that folks have been reaching out to advocate on those issues. We have a lot of really committed bicyclists in our metro area. And really appreciate the program with the Westcom police departments to address mental health issues, because police and EMS are responding to a lot of these situations and they're not always the right person or they don't have the skills. And yeah, we can try to educate all of those first responders to have some of the skills, but that's not really what their calling is, not really what their work is supposed to be about. And so having the right kind of folks to be part of that response, I think really effective. It's really helpful. But again, as the representative said, we got to have some place for those folks to go afterwards. I'm hearing a lot of stories from our sheriff's department about, just these are the majority of the calls that they're facing, and where do you take folks and how do you get them help, because the jail is not the right place for people to be. And who responds can really dictate the outcome of that situation and the kind of help that they get. And so it sounds like it's making a real difference. Our city is growing, and that need is growing as well. Chief McCluskey just told me that the plan is to go from 35 officers to 80 in 10 years and build a new facility as part of that too. We got to make sure that our cities have the spending authority and the resources to be able to respond to those needs. And gosh, finding those people, making sure we have really quality folks to be in those positions, that's a challenge. And we need to start doing that work now to get ready for 10 years down the road to make sure we've got a really good opportunity to be able to respond to what the city's going to need as it's growing so fast.
My name is Garth. Just looking at kind of East Palestine and Ohio, where they had the train wreck, and it really affected that community really big. It's a small community, and honestly, I don't think they have anything ready for that whenever that type of disaster happens. But just since it's a big topic, what are some of the things that you guys are seeing moving since those types of disasters are happening more frequently? It sounds like, or I've seen more train wrecks since hearing about East Palestine, but I was just seeing if there was anything moving within you guys' realms that can kind of, I guess, spearhead it before it happens type thing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you. The legislature, our minds have been elsewhere, honestly. But that was a huge public emergency. And we saw that at a number of points, it was not responded to in appropriate ways. And then there were all kinds of policy decisions that have been made leading up to it that created or put us at risk for a more dangerous situation. And so I think that's something that the legislature should be talking about. We are not seeing legislation related to it right now, but there is the possibility for us to do a study committee and be checking in. And maybe our county officials could speak to it more. Maybe it's something that's been on your radar, but with emergency management, thinking about how we respond to those disasters and thinking about what kind of transportation policy would make us safer. Because we have a lot of folks moving across our state, through our state, going to other places, especially with trucks. But I know trains are also a piece of that too. So, I'm open to hear what recommendations would make a difference. I don't have the expertise in that area, but thank you for raising that concern.
Yes, thank you, Garth. I'm not aware of any legislation that's before us. We talked a little bit about emergency management. I feel confident that we have the resources to address a problem, but the key is to try to address it before it happens. And this is where it gets, it's a fine line between regulation and letting business run. I mean, it's a very fine line, but you do need guardrails. And what we're seeing across the country, not necessarily just specific to Iowa, is these large venture capitalist firms are coming in and buying these railroads. So you're seeing the trains become longer. The regulation is not to have you have one person driving the train up front and that's it. I think that one of these trains that derailed had 200 and some cars on it. So it's probably going to need a look at federally as well, and hopefully they'll address that and see what can we do to make the rail system safer, right? We've talked about it. We have some, probably our largest line is south here down towards Osceola is, there's a lot of, I think that rail is pretty good across Iowa because it carries Amtrak and passenger trains. I'm not familiar with that we have any big problem. I suppose it could happen anywhere. I can't say it'll never happen, but I think we're gonna have to look at it holistically and not put too much regulation on, but we have to do something in order nationally, I'd say probably more so than statewide. Since these trains are traveling across the country, you can't say, well, we're gonna do this in Iowa, but you can't, Nebraska doesn't do or whatever. So hopefully the federal government will take a look at this because I think it's a situation that needs to be looked at.
I'm Joan Ross, and one of the topics we hear a lot about is the mental illness. And I think most of us in this room are aware of the young kid in Adel that committed suicide. Most of the time, these young kids that are committing suicide, it comes back to bullying. And I know there was a big meeting held with the parents and said, the school board needs to do more, the teachers need to do more. My thought, first of all, is it starts at home. I think the parents have a lot to do with the kids and the bullying. I'm not sure what you can do in your position to address the bullying. But I also know that in our schools, I think our teachers and our faculty have restraints as to how they can discipline and what they can do with some of the kids that do get out of control. So I know mental illness is a big thing, but bullying to me is something I think that really needs to be addressed. And I think we as a society and parents need to take the first step in addressing that.
Thank you. You know, one thing that adults can do is we can do some work on how we treat each other. We see a lot of bullying happen between adults. We see a lot of online behavior that's really, really hurtful, sometimes truly violent. And so our young people are watching us, and that makes a big impact. And so, you know, that is definitely a piece of it, how we relate to each other, how we disagree, how we live together as a community. We've got some work to do. And it's really, you know, there's pieces at every level because, you know, I've been hearing from families, you know, like, I didn't know it was this bad. You know, my kid doesn't tell me everything that's going on. They hid it from me. Or the kids who are engaged in bullying others, parents might not have any idea and wouldn't expect their child to behave that way. So there's a lot of opportunities in our communities to create a culture where people are respectful, people are kind, people are empathetic, and you know, we need some, you know, you need the positive adult presence for the young people in the schools. And a lot of schools just don't have enough folks who can be there and do that work. Our counselors and school psychologists, we don't have a good ratio of those in our public schools. We could do a lot better to have more of those supportive people to help folks when they're struggling, when they have challenges, to be safe people you can turn to when something's wrong. I think that there are some pieces that the administration has to work on in that school district and every school district as well, to take those concerns seriously and to respond to them in an effective way. Don't necessarily have the answers about what that looks like, but it's clear that it's a bigger issue that needs to be addressed. And as a state legislator, I'm interested in thinking about how can I offer resources for our communities to have what they need to make positive changes. And so I've been showing up to a lot of those meetings just to listen. I was at the school board meeting where parents talked for about 2 hours about parents and kids sharing about what's going on and how hard it's been. I've been at some parent meetings, just talking to the families who've been most directly affected. And yeah, we have some work to do in our community. And there's just so many angles we can come at it from, and they're all worth doing something on.
Yeah, first of all, I'll start out, Joan, thank you for the question. And I'll tip my hat to Senator Trone Garriott. You know, I'm watching the nightly news. I'm still one of these old folks that watch the news at 10 o'clock. And who'd I see in the crowd out there in Adel was Sarah. So part of it is showing up. We have to show up. We have to show up for each other. Starts at home. I think these kids have a lot of underlying mental issues. We're talking about it now. I think the pandemic and how we didn't socialize really had an effect on kids. And we need more help in the schools. We need more resources for these kids to reach out to. But I agree with you, Joan. A lot of this starts at home, and there's no government fix sometimes. We can offer resources for mental health counseling, but we got to show up as a community, and I think, and be there. And I think that's the biggest thing we can do. And hopefully we can get, just because that happened at Adel, it could happen anywhere. And I think our society, to Sarah's point, you know, we got to treat each other like, you know, everything you see on social media, news, it's divisive, it's seeds of division, and it's not good mentally for anybody. And this is a phase in our time that we're going through that is going to have some serious repercussions, in my view.
Steve Herwig from West Des Moines, Kenan, and Sarah, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate that you're willing to take comments from people. With the bills that have been passed through the State House this year, I'm afraid that the phrase Iowa nice is just a distant memory. And I'm particularly concerned about the vilification of trans people, especially where they fit with the LGBTQ community, and how we basically declared war. We're making these people the exception, and there was speakers at the recent CPAC meeting in Washington, D.C., and their goal is to eradicate trans people. And with the legislation that's passed and separating these people out and making them targets, this goes along with the bullying that was just addressed. And I know that you have not been in favor of this legislation or the supermajorities. They passed this stuff through, but I think we're on a slippery slope by separating these people out and not treating people equal, as the Declaration of Independence has specified, all people being created equal. So thanks for your work on this area, but I'm afraid for what's going to happen down the road. I think that makes them targets of bullying because the legislature has really given them license to be separated out. Thank you.
Well, I can speak to this because we just went through it this week. Okay, we spent a whole day discussing a myriad of bills that are culture wars that have no place in Iowa. And speaking specifically about the bill that passed this week, the three bills, whatever happened to love one another? Well, my folks, I told you I had great parents that raised us right. We didn't have any money, but we didn't know we didn't have any money. But one thing they taught me was treat everybody how you want to be treated, and not everybody's the same as you. And we have to be more accepting. These bills that passed will not stand. They will not stand the test of time. And we are on the wrong side of history in Iowa. And we're picking on people for who they are. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I understand trans 100%. I don't. But I can have empathy for people that are going through that. And we cannot let this stand in our state. It's going to have a broad impact in how we grow. Yesterday, I had 2 people email me. We have a healthcare crisis in this state, not enough medical professions. He's a doctor in Georgia wanting to move to Iowa. One of his kids is part of the LGBTQ community. And he said, Kenan, did those laws pass last week? We were thinking about moving here. We want to move back to the Midwest, be closer to our family. And I'd tell him yes. It's a deal breaker. That's real. And another email yesterday from a parent concerned because her 2 20-year-old kids in our district are going to leave Iowa. And you can say, Kenan, that's whatever you want to say, but that's real. And we need to stamp this out. There were people in that chamber that pushed that button that didn't want to. That bill should not have passed. There were amendments on that bill that didn't get ran, that should have gotten ran because of somebody wanted that bill passed. And I'm telling you, folks, we got to get back to the middle in this state. It can no longer be here. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. And you can pick a side. It's easy to pick a side. But ignorance does not have a place in this state. If you don't understand that you can learn and empathize with people, it doesn't have a place. It's no longer okay to be in this narrow mind. If you're going to be sitting in that state legislature, you better be willing to learn and listen. And I have a tremendous calling with the other side that trusts me and, that I can talk to and get things done. But sometimes they can't do anything. There were people that hit that button that didn't want to. This will not stand the test of time. And I'll work to overturn it.
I feel like we've seen a number of very hot button issues that have been used as opportunities to take away local decision making and local control. When you have a challenging and sensitive issue to navigate, I think that the best decisions really come from the folks in those communities. And so, in those situations, and there's a lot more thoughtfulness and, understanding of the actual circumstances to make better choices. And so, the Senate passed a bathroom bill this week about school bathrooms that encourages anyone in our state to complain or file a complaint, and the Attorney General needs to investigate it. Schools have been navigating these challenging situations for a while, making the best choices for their local circumstances and making it work. And this takes that away from them and creates just an incentive for folks to be watching and informing on their neighbors. I don't think that's a good way for Iowa to proceed. It's creating a really hostile environment for a lot of folks. And, we need to be aware that discrimination is wrong. The healthcare bill, the affirming care ban bill, allows this kind of care for certain categories of folks, but not for folks who are trans. And that's discriminatory. And other states have determined that it's a violation of parents' rights, it's discriminatory, and we will see it challenged in court. And so we're setting up Iowa for a lot of expensive litigation, but then also a lot of folks who are just feeling that they can't get the care that they need or their family members need. And so they can't stay in the state. And immediately that night, I was getting texts from folks who are just active, involved members of our community saying, we're looking at houses in other states. We're moving, we're leaving. I know some folks are saying, okay, good riddance. We're glad you're going, but gosh, they're taking their whole families with them. And there's all these other categories of folks that are looking at and saying, I don't think Iowa's the place for me. And I want people to feel welcome here. I want people to build a life here. When I first moved to Iowa, that was the energy. It was like, you can come here and do things you cannot do anywhere else because there's so much opportunity here. And these bills are pushing us in a very different direction. And it's sad. It's sad. And, we talk about Iowa nice, but gosh, I want Iowa kind. I want, Iowa welcoming. And I know we have been that as a state. And when I'm out in the community, that's what I experience. But these bills coming from the legislature just don't match what I see in our state.
We'll go ahead and have one final question before we'll give our legislators a couple of minutes to have closing comments.
Okay. That's exactly what I was going to talk to you guys about. So I'm not a native of Iowa. My husband and I are both military. He chose to join the Iowa National Guard. We chose Iowa because I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Iowa. I went to Creighton Law School. So there were a number of reasons why we chose Iowa, but I don't want to stay. My daughter is in 4th grade. My son is in 1st grade. And I don't want them to grow up in a community where they could be othered and put in a category and defined, where they aren't free to make healthcare choices as a young woman, right? Or free to love and to marry and to establish a family in a community that they have now claimed as their own. I don't want this to be their community where they have friends and family who aren't welcome here, where I have dear friends who would not be welcome here, and where they right now, they don't understand necessarily these things. They have questions about what's going on as they hear the news or they see us talking about some of these issues. And we try to explain it in ways that they can understand, but it is a big deal. If you want to grow Iowa, If you want people to move here, we all need to be able to live our life here, whatever that may look like. And if I am different than you, that needs to be okay. We were in Las Vegas, we were in New Mexico. One of the reasons we got out of the military is because the places that my husband could get stationed had crap school districts. Okay, truly. New Mexico, terrible. Like there's just no place to put our kids, right? We could end up in Clovis, New Mexico, or Holloman, which is Alamogordo, New Mexico. Not great locations for school districts. Las Vegas, not the best for school districts for what we wanted for our kids. So when Iowa came up, we were incentivized to come here as an opportunity because we looked at the schools. We looked at the suburbs because of the schools that were here. And right now, I'm not sure I want my kids to stay here. And I understand that this is a little bit of, it's not necessarily, it is like a political issue, right? The culture wars that we say have no place. Well, whether they should have a place, they do right now. And I don't know that everybody understands the true impacts of that. So I guess my point in saying all this is like, you guys are very keen to the fact that this does have a real impact and you are seeing it, but I think the people that it's also going to impact are your skilled workforce. We both work for the federal government. I can pick up and move to any other location. There are nationwide cities that we could go and I could work for as a member of the federal government. But why would we want to lose our skilled workforce over these things? And I don't know that people truly understand. So I guess one thing that I would ask of you guys is, you talk about the budget issues and how this is sustainable. You talk about you understand the second and third order impacts. Some of us who maybe research that might understand the second and third order impacts of some of these bills, but it would be nice to actually be able to present that to the community. What is the true impact of these bills? What does this mean for Waukee if this voucher thing goes past 2026? Are there any things that we can do? Does this mean our property taxes are going up? Right? What does that mean if our property taxes go up and then we don't have the skilled workforce? Well, that means I can't go out to eat in Waukee anymore because I don't have anybody working in any of the restaurants, right? Or whatever that looks like. I don't know. But being able to provide us that information so we can truly understand what this looks like. What does it look like when we have another general practitioner that doesn't want to come to Iowa and practice here? What does that mean for our wait times, for urgent care, for emergency care, for skilled, I don't know, whatever it is, but I think we need that information to truly understand the impacts of this and be able to talk to our community. We are your assets. We live next to our neighbors, right? You are only two people, but help us talk about this in ways that is meaningful so that when my neighbor who has a different viewpoint than me and I have a discussion, I have something meaningful to say. Hey, Tom, did you know that this really means that this will happen? I don't think that's what you want. You know, that's my daughter. That's how it's going to impact her. And you love her. She's always in your yard and hanging out with your grandkids and blah, 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 or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? So I guess that's what I would ask from you guys is just help us have these conversations in the communities and with the people that we live and work with so that we can help this really be Iowa nice. Iowa nice is truly a misnomer. Iowa nice is I'm going to say nice things to your face, and then I'm going to go and do these other things that have 100% disparate impact on everybody who's not me. And I can say that as an outsider, and I don't say that to be mean, but that's my view. I'm not from here. I chose to come here, and I want to contribute to this community. I'm just not sure it wants me at all. And I'm not even in one of the other categories, according to like this legislation, but I'm an ally. And I think that's also the bigger category that's going to be leaving are those allies of folks, right? Of making this a state where people want to live and work. Your beautiful sunsets, your green belt, it's not enough, you know? Anyway.
Thank you. When we hear from people who share their stories, the personal stories, the impacts, that really helps us to be able to share that with our colleagues and to share it publicly. But every Iowan has that opportunity to be sharing with your neighbors and your local leaders and your business community about the impact it's going to make, because we don't really know yet what the impact is going to be. I mean, we have a general sense of how it will be negative, but we don't know those personal stories of how it's impacting people right now unless we hear them. So thank you for sharing that, because we need to be sharing those stories. There's a lot of folks who are really frustrated. And for the folks who don't feel safe here, I understand why they feel like they may need to leave. But for folks who can stay, we have an opportunity to make things different. And we build the community we want. And this is a community where a lot of people have chosen to live here and they didn't grow up here. It's a growing community, and I'm very proud of that. We have a lot of diversity of opinions and backgrounds and religions in this metro area, and especially in this district. And I love sharing about that with my colleagues because they come from districts that are just not like that, that they're not seeing that. Like I said, I've got a growing district. A lot of other districts are shrinking. We've got, some tremendous, wonderful people in this district that just my colleagues might not be thinking about in their districts. And so I'm honored that I have the opportunity to be fighting for those priorities and sharing about that reality in the legislature. It may not always be received well, but I get to be there and stand up for that. And so, I'll be thinking about ways that we can help magnify the stories of folks who are frustrated or the priorities of folks that we might not be getting to. And we always appreciate your ideas. Kenan and I really are not professional politicians. We both were elected relatively recently. We both come from different backgrounds, and we just want state government to connect with what's going on in real people's lives. And so we're always looking for ways to do that better.
Yeah, your question's very well taken, and I think you have a sympathetic ear with us. So you said, hey, what tools can I have is your question. And first of all, starting out is you showed up today. And I see that we're not showing up in Iowa. Very few people get involved in state politics. If you go door to door to door to door to door, and talk to people, they really don't, they're so busy. I can understand why they don't. They're so busy. We have to talk to people and educate them and let them know what's going on. Your next door neighbor may not know what we just passed this week because we live in a society of social media and this polarizing message that we're hearing. We say, hey, we're going to stand up. This isn't, but then somebody else says, well, they're just liberals. You know what I mean? And no, then we say, no, they're whatever, and I think we got to get away from that. And the best thing you can do is have a conversation with your neighbor. And here's what I can only tell you what I think is going to happen mathematically, why this isn't good. I can't predict. I can't give you a bullet point list. We have to go out and talk to each other and it's just as simple as this neighbor and this neighbor. It's on each side of you. And if we start that, we'll change. And I think what we're going to see happen, our pendulum is swung so far one way in this state that it's going to come crashing through. And we're going to go so far this way, people are going to wake up and go, whoa, this isn't what I want. And boom, it's a sweeping change. And, we go from this ditch to this ditch. So I've spoke earlier about, hey, we need to get back in the middle. This is my 5th year, and I can tell you there are very few moderates in that chamber from like me. Moderate Democrat and moderate Republican, they're not a whole lot of difference. But they're becoming fewer and fewer and fewer. And I don't know if that's the same way in the Senate, but it certainly is in the House. And
Senate, very different personalities in these two chambers. I appreciate in the House, there's more diversity of opinion.
Yeah. And then we, so the house changes quicker because you're up every 2 years. And, part of it is you got to have, I think the best government is split government. Because then you've got a chamber that's in Republican control, chamber that's in Democratic. And really you got to talk about things and nothing moves. And maybe that's good. So we wouldn't have had this conversation that we had last week had we had one chamber, and we're out of balance in this state. I truly feel that. And I've been around a long time. I can see when we're out of balance.
Yeah, we would be better if we had to work together. And that's not the case right now. One party rule is not good for anyone. Everybody needs to have to listen and work through things together. And I think there is a real desire for that. And I hear that from the public. And I hope that we'll move in that direction. And there's some ways that we can do that. So please send me an email. I've got some thoughts about how folks can get engaged, making that happen, making sure that our government really reflects the people who really truly want us to get things done for Iowa and not be so divisive.
So I want to thank everybody for their questions. We'll give our legislators just a couple of minutes each to have final comments, and then everybody can take a cinnamon roll and some coffee before we leave. So we'll start that off with Senator Trone Garriott.
I just really appreciate this opportunity. I really appreciate the folks who reach out and share what's on their mind, the people who call me, the folks who invite me to events. I learned so much from our community about what we should be working on, and we are not experts on everything. And even the things we think we know about, there's always more we can be learning. So thank you for this community being invested in making that happen. So keep us in mind. Please invite us to things. Please reach out. Even if you think that your legislators agree with you, or even if you're pretty sure they don't, we still need to be hearing from you. And we will do our best to respond as we can. We get a lot of communications during the session, but there's always, we work all the time, all year long. And so we're glad to meet with you and visit with you about the things that matter to you all year round. And, I get frustrated with some of the things, so some of the policy that I see moving at the state capitol, but I always feel more hopeful when I'm out in the community with people. So thank you for giving me hope, because this community is full of wonderful folks who don't always see eye to eye, but have so many wonderful things to offer.
Thank you for putting this on, and more importantly, thanks for showing up. I think that's where it starts. And we have a lot of work to do. We have always had a lot of work to do in this country, but I'll just close with my 2 minutes, and I promise not to filibuster, Rob. I'm going to close with my 2 minutes in talking about something I'm very passionate about, and that's housing. I came out of a subcommittee this week. Bill came across. Most people thought it was non-controversial. Just going to pass it through, go around the lobby, just a few tweaks in the law about landlord-tenant rights. Just a few tweaks here, tweaks there, making sure we got the magistrates. They know we got the law solid, so they know what's going on. But I probably spent, and whenever I see a landlord-tenant law, a bill, I always think, where's this thing coming from? It's called special interest. My antenna goes up. So I want to tell you what's in this bill. First area is about, sounds non-controversial, and I can tell you my colleagues thought it was non-controversial, and everybody in the lobby thought it was non-controversial. But it's something as simple as adding a description to the rent. So you have rent, you have to pay your rent. I understand that. But now this bill would add fees, utilities, anything else they want to tack on the definition of rent. Okay, so that means if I don't pay my fees, judge used to throw that out and say, no, they're paying their rent. You can't evict somebody for fees. Now you can evict them for fees quicker. The second area that's in this bill drives me crazy. Notice. So now I have 4 days to serve you notice to evict you. Now we want to add weekends onto that. So Saturday, Sunday, that's part of the 4 days. What's that do? You know, you got people that can't get the money together on the weekend. The banks are closed. So then I get served a notice in 30 days, I'm going to be evicted. Here's one that, you know, we talk about business and we talk about, I don't have to have my contract right. If I give you a contract, if there's a mistake in the contract, that's fine, as long as I don't willfully enforce it. I read a contract, they say I got to do this. Okay, I can't park my car here. I got to clean the carpets when I leave. We really didn't mean that. That's just a blanket boilerplate lease we put out there. That's not how we should run this. I mean, I run this state and housing. Then there's a code that says, what do you do with property? We're going to put in the Iowa code that says, when a judgment is served, you're to take this product out of the house and throw it away in the garbage. Doesn't sound like a big deal. We all live in a nice home. But we're talking about somebody's home. We're talking about where somebody lives. Maybe nobody in this room has that problem. But eviction is a big deal. And this is the type of legislation that is going through that state house, that is handed to somebody, and you go run the football. It's not right. And somebody better stand up and fight for people that are struggling. We look around this community and we don't see it, but it's here. And it's here. And eviction's a big deal. In that law, even states, you can throw the mobile home away. We're going to put that in Iowa code? Come on. So things happen down there that affect real people. And we better start fighting back and making sure it's not right. So I had my piece at the subcommittee. I was the only person that stood up and talked against the bill. One person. Everybody else was in favor. Two of my colleagues, who I respect very much, but all the lobby. And so I was walking through the lobby afterwards, said, one of the lobbyists that brought the bill up said, hey, Kenan, you know, no hard feelings. No, there's no hard feelings. No, I'm going to be fine. You know, but what you're doing is wrong. And you're standing on the wrong side of this bill and you know it. So now, can we get it stopped? I hope so. I'll do my darndest to amend it, to fix it. And that's the kind of thing we got to get involved with. That's why this is so important work we do. And we need to take care of each other. It doesn't mean we're socialist or whatever you call it. That's not what we're talking about. This is talking about loving one another. Love your neighbor. Take care of your neighbor. Government's supposed to give people a hand up once in a while. So we're going to fight against this and continue to, because it's very important. So I wanted to end with that bill. And hopefully, when this bill comes to the floor, there's enough outrage that people call up and say no. You know what? It won't. It'll go on. But we're going to fight against it.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. I'd like to thank the city of Waukee for hosting this event, and absolutely thank Representative Kenan Judge and State Senator Sarah Trone Garriott for attending.
One other quick thing, I have one person that wanted our newsletters. So if anybody isn't getting our newsletters and would like to receive it, I have your name and email address. We can both put them on, but that's a great way to stay in touch.
Yeah, and did you all have some handouts with our emails on them?
I
Yeah.
believe we do, yeah.
Those are awesome. Send us an email if you want to get connected or be on the newsletter list or just want to have a conversation. Just reach out.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.